The gunshot that killed her father echoed through the valley long after his body hit the ground. And Josephine Edwards knew in that instant that everything she had ever loved would soon turn to dust. It was July of 1872, and the heat in Dallas, Texas, was merciless as always. But the real burn came from watching her mother collapse beside her father's body, clutching at his vest as though she could pull him back from death through sheer will. Josephine was 20 years old enough to understand that their cattle ranch was now marked for ruin, young enough to still believe she might save it. Her brother Michael had already left 3 months prior, drawn by gold fever to California despite their father's protests. Her sister Clara had married and moved to Kansas the year before. When the drought came and turned their water sources to cracked earth, when the cattle began dying one by one under the relentless sun, when her mother grew sick from the grief and the heat and the hopelessness of it all, Josephine found herself utterly alone. Her mother passed in September, whispering apologies with her last breath. The neighbors who had promised to help disappeared like morning dew. The ranch hands took their final pay and rode off without looking back. Even Reverend Phillips, who had baptized her as an infant, stopped coming by after the 3rd week. Josephine stood in the empty house, listened to the wind howl through gaps in the walls, and made a decision that most would have called madness. She would survive. She would make this ranch work. She would not abandon the only home she had ever known, even if it meant fighting the land itself. The first month alone nearly killed her. The well had run almost dry, forcing her to ride 3 miles each day to a creek that still held water. She learned to shoot with real accuracy, bringing down rabbits and the occasional turkey. She sold off most of the remaining cattle to a buyer from Fort Worth, keeping only the 6 strongest cows and 1 stubborn bull. She patched the roof with materials salvaged from the collapsed barn. She planted a small vegetable garden near the house where she could water it with her ration supply. Her hands became rough and calloused. Her face grew tan and weathered. She cut her dark hair shorter because it was easier to manage. She wore her father's old shirts and her brother's abandoned trousers because dresses were impractical for the work that consumed every hour of daylight. Winter brought different challenges. The cold was sharp and biting, and Josephine spent her evenings huddled near the fire, mending clothes and equipment by lamplight. She had no one to talk to except the cattle and the old ranch dog, a graying mutt named Biscuit who had been too loyal to leave with the others. Sometimes she would read aloud from her mother's Bible just to hear a human voice, even if it was only her own. She celebrated Christmas alone with a meager meal and allowed herself exactly 1 hour to cry before wiping her face and returning to the endless work. By the spring of 1873, Josephine had transformed into something harder than the girl she had been. She knew how to track game, how to bargain with the rare traveling merchants who passed through, how to deliver a calf when one of her cows went into labor. She knew loneliness like an old friend, accepted it as the price of her stubborn independence. She told herself she did not need anyone, that she was better off alone, that people only left anyway, so why bother hoping for anything different? That was when Lucas Lawson rode into her life on a hot afternoon in April, leading a pack mule and looking for water. Josephine saw him coming from a distance, just a figure wavering in the heat shimmer on the road. She grabbed her rifle instinctively and waited on the porch, Biscuit growling low beside her. The stranger was tall in the saddle, wearing a dusty brown hat pulled low against the sun. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. Broad shoulders, a weathered face that suggested he was somewhere in his mid-20s, and an easy way of sitting his horse that spoke of long experience in the saddle. He stopped a respectful distance from the house and raised one hand in greeting. "Afternoon, madam," he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Name is Lucas Lawson. I am hoping you might spare some water for my animals and myself. I can pay." Josephine kept the rifle visible but pointed down. "Water costs nothing," she said, her voice rough from disuse. "Trough is over there." She gestured with her chin toward the cattle trough, which she kept filled from her daily trips to the creek. Lucas touched the brim of his hat in thanks and guided his horse toward the trough. Josephine watched as he dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who had spent more of his life on horseback than on foot. He let his horse drink first, then the mule, before filling his own canteen. She noticed he did not waste a drop, did not splash carelessly. A man who understood the value of water in this country. He turned back toward her, squinting slightly in the bright sunlight. "Much obliged. Is there anything I might do to repay the kindness? I am handy with repairs if you have need." "No need," Josephine said curtly. She wanted him gone. Strangers meant complications, and she had built her survival on simplicity and self-reliance. Lucas seemed to consider this, then nodded slowly. But his eyes had been moving across the property, taking in the patched roof, the empty corrals, the signs of hard work done by too few hands. "You running this place alone?" he asked, and there was something in his tone that was not quite disbelief but definitely surprise. "That is my business," Josephine replied, lifting the rifle just a fraction. He raised his hands slightly, palms out. "No offense meant, madam. Just unusual is all. Takes a strong person to manage a ranch solo." He paused, then added, "I have been working cattle drives and ranch work for the past 8 years. Currently between jobs. If you ever need a hand, I am a fair worker and do not ask for much in wages." "Not hiring," Josephine said flatly. Lucas nodded again, accepting her words without argument. "Fair enough. But I will be in Dallas for a few days if you change your mind, staying at the boarding house on Main Street." He mounted his horse in one smooth motion. "Thank you again for the water. You have a good evening, madam." He rode away without looking back, and Josephine watched until he disappeared down the road. Then she lowered the rifle and released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Something about the encounter had unsettled her, though she could not name exactly what. Maybe it was the kindness in his voice. Maybe it was the way he had looked at her ranch with assessment but not judgment. Maybe it was simply that he was the first person in months who had spoken to her as though she were worth speaking to. She pushed the thoughts aside and returned to work. The fence on the east pasture needed mending, and she had already wasted enough daylight. But over the next 3 days, Josephine found her mind returning to the stranger with increasing frequency. Lucas Lawson. The name had a solid sound to it. She caught herself wondering what had brought him to Dallas, what sort of work he was looking for, whether he really was as skilled as he claimed. She told herself it was only practical thinking. The ranch did need help. She was barely holding everything together. One bad break, one injury, one serious problem, and she would lose everything she had fought to keep. On the 4th day, a section of the main corral fence collapsed when one of the cows leaned too hard against already weakened posts. Josephine spent 2 hours in the blazing sun trying to repair it herself. But the posts needed replacing, and she simply did not have the strength to dig out the old ones and set new ones deep enough. By the time she admitted defeat, her hands were blistered and bleeding, her back screamed with pain, and she was perilously close to tears of frustration. She sat on the porch as the sun began to set, Biscuit resting his head on her knee, and faced the truth she had been avoiding. She could not do this alone anymore. Pride was going to kill her or cost her the ranch, and either way she would have lost. The next morning, Josephine bathed in the cold water she had hauled from the creek, put on her cleanest shirt, and rode into Dallas. The town had grown a little since she had last visited in January, with several new buildings going up along the main street. She felt conspicuous and uncomfortable as she rode past people who stared at her masculine clothing and weathered appearance. Let them stare. She had not come for their approval. The boarding house was easy to find. A two-story structure with a faded sign and a porch where several men sat smoking and playing cards. Josephine tied her horse and approached, feeling the weight of curious eyes. "I am looking for Lucas Lawson," she said to the group at large. One of the men jerked his thumb toward the door. "Inside. Room at the top of the stairs, second on the left." Josephine climbed the stairs, her heart beating harder than such a simple action warranted. She knocked on the indicated door and waited. After a moment, she heard footsteps, and then Lucas opened the door. He was in shirt sleeves, his hair slightly damp as though he had just washed. Recognition crossed his face immediately. "Madam," he said, surprise evident in his tone. "I did not expect to see you." "You said you were looking for ranch work," Josephine said without preamble. "Offer still stand." Something shifted in Lucas's expression, a subtle relaxation as though a question had been answered. "Yes, madam, it does. I cannot pay much. Room and board and what little cash I can spare. Work is hard, place is barely holding together." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "But if you are serious about the offer, I could use the help." Lucas stepped back into his room, grabbed his hat and a small bag that appeared to contain all his possessions. "When do we start?" "Now, if you are ready." "I am always ready," Lucas said, and there was a quiet confidence in his voice that made Josephine feel something she had not felt in a very long time. It might have been relief. It might have been hope. She was not ready to name it yet. They rode back to the ranch in relative silence, though it was not an uncomfortable quiet. Lucas seemed content to take in the landscape, occasionally asking a question about the property or the area. Josephine answered briefly, but without hostility. By the time they arrived, the sun was high and hot. "You can take the small room off the kitchen," Josephine said as they dismounted. It was the ranch hand quarters, basic but sound. As for work, the corral fence is the immediate problem. After that, there is more than enough to keep us busy. Lucas surveyed the broken fence, then walked around the corral, testing posts and examining the damage. Josephine watched him work, noting the methodical way he assessed the situation. After several minutes, he turned back to her. "I can fix this, but we will need some new posts and fresh lumber." "You have materials, or do we need to source them?" "There is timber in the old barn that should work," Josephine said. "Whatever you need, just let me know." Lucas nodded and set to work immediately. Josephine returned to her own tasks, but she found herself frequently glancing toward the corral where Lucas was digging out old posts with steady, efficient movements. He worked through the heat without complaint, pausing only to drink from the water barrel she kept near the work areas. By evening, he had made more progress than she could have managed in 3 days. They ate a simple dinner of beans and cornbread at the kitchen table, and the experience of sharing a meal with another person felt strange and overwhelming to Josephine. She was acutely aware of every sound she made, every bite she took. Lucas seemed to sense her discomfort and kept the conversation minimal and practical. "Fence should be finished tomorrow," he said. "After that, what is the priority?" Josephine considered. "The well is getting low. We might need to dig it deeper or find another water source. And the cattle need checking. I have not been able to cover all the grazing areas as often as I should." "I can ride out after the fence is done, get a sense of the land and where the cattle are ranging," Lucas offered. "Been a while since I worked a property this size. Feels good to be settling somewhere instead of always moving." You do not like cattle drives? Josephine asked, surprising herself with the question. Lucas smiled slightly. They have their moments. Good money, see the country. But it is hard living, and you never have anything to show for it at the end except sore muscles and a pocketful of coins that disappear fast. I have been thinking lately that I would rather put my work into something that lasts. He paused, then added, if that makes sense. It made perfect sense to Josephine. It was exactly how she felt about the ranch, about her stubborn determination to keep it running. It does, she said quietly. Over the following weeks, a routine developed between them. Lucas proved to be as skilled as he had claimed, tackling each project with competence and reliability. He fixed the fence, then helped deepen the well, which bought them precious security for the dry months ahead. He rode the property lines and reported back on the condition of the cattle, which were in better shape than Josephine had dared hope. He repaired equipment, reinforced the barn, and even coaxed the old windmill into working again. But more than the practical help, what began to change Josephine was the simple presence of another person. Lucas had an easy manner that never pushed or demanded. He spoke when speech was useful, stayed quiet when silence was better. He never questioned her decisions or tried to take over, always asking her opinion before starting a new project. Slowly, gradually, Josephine felt the hard shell she had built around herself begin to crack. One evening in early June, they sat on the porch after a long day, watching the sun sink toward the horizon in a blaze of orange and red. Biscuit lay between them, enjoying the attention of two people instead of one. Lucas had been at the ranch for almost 2 months, and Josephine could hardly remember what it had been like before he arrived. "Can I ask you something?" Lucas said, breaking the comfortable silence. Josephine tensed slightly. "I suppose. Why did you stay?" After everyone else left, when the ranch was falling apart, most people would have sold out, moved on. Why did you fight so hard for this place? Josephine was quiet for a long moment, organizing thoughts she had never put into words before. "Because it is mine," she finally said. "Not mine because I own it, but mine because I know every inch of it. My father built this ranch from nothing. My mother planted those roses by the fence. I grew up chasing chickens in that yard, learning to ride in those corrals. Everyone I ever loved is buried in the plot beyond the hill." She swallowed hard. When they all left, when I was alone, leaving felt like I would be abandoning them, like I would be saying their lives did not matter, that all their work meant nothing. I could not do that. Even if it killed me, I could not just walk away. Lucas was quiet for several heartbeats. Then he said very softly, "You do not have to anymore." Josephine turned to look at him, startled by the intensity in his voice. "What? Be alone, fight everything by yourself. You do not have to anymore." Lucas met her eyes steadily. "I am not leaving, Josephine. Not unless you want me to. This place, this work, it matters to me. You matter to me." Something in Josephine's chest seemed to crack open, and before she could stop herself, she was crying. Not the angry, frustrated tears she had shed in private over the past year, but deep, shaking sobs that came from a well of loneliness she had refused to acknowledge. Lucas moved closer, uncertain, then carefully put an arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, letting herself be held, letting herself feel the comfort and safety she had denied herself for so long. When the tears finally subsided, Josephine pulled back, embarrassed. "I am sorry. I do not usually know apologies," Lucas said gently. "You have been carrying too much alone for too long. Anyone would break eventually." "I thought I had to be strong," Josephine said, her voice hoarse. "If I let myself feel it, if I admitted how hard it was, I would fall apart and never get up again." "Being strong does not mean never breaking," Lucas said. "It means getting back up after you do, and you have done that more times than anyone should have to." He paused, then added carefully, "But maybe you do not have to do it alone anymore. Maybe we can be strong together." Josephine looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. She saw the kindness in his eyes, the quiet strength in his face, the sincerity in his expression. Something warm and frightening and wonderful began to bloom in her chest. She was not ready to name it, not yet, but she could not deny its existence. "I would like that," she whispered. Lucas smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. "Then it is settled. We are partners in this." The word partners hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than its simple definition. Josephine nodded, not trusting her voice, and they sat together as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to appear. In the days that followed, something had changed between them, though neither spoke of it directly. They worked side by side with a new awareness, hands occasionally brushing as they passed tools, eyes meeting and holding a moment longer than necessary. Josephine caught herself watching Lucas when he was unaware, admiring the capable way he moved, the patience he showed with the animals, the quiet humor that emerged in small comments throughout the day. One afternoon, they rode out together to check on the cattle in the far pasture. The day was hot but not unbearable, with a breeze that made the grass ripple like water. They found the small herd grazing peacefully, and Lucas spent time examining each animal, checking for injuries or illness. "They look good," he said with satisfaction. "You did well keeping them healthy through the hard times." "I lost more than I saved," Josephine said, the old guilt rising. Lucas turned to face her. "You saved these. That matters. You cannot measure your worth by what you could not control. The drought, the circumstances, none of that was your fault. What you did with what you had, that is what counts." Josephine felt her throat tighten. "You are very kind to say that. I am not being kind, I am being honest." Lucas moved closer, his expression serious. "Josephine, I need you to understand something. What you did, surviving alone, keeping this place running against all odds, that is not weakness or failure. That is extraordinary. You are extraordinary." No one had ever spoken to her that way. Her father had loved her but expected strength without acknowledging the cost. Her mother had been gentle but fragile. Her siblings had left, but Lucas stood before her, seeing all her struggles and scars, and called her extraordinary. "I do not feel extraordinary," she admitted. "Most days I just feel tired." "Then let me help carry the weight," Lucas said. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. "We are partners, remember. That means your burdens are my burdens." Josephine looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care so much? You barely know me." Lucas was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "When I rode up to this ranch that first day, I was not looking for anything except water and maybe a day or two of work. I had been drifting for years, never putting down roots, never letting myself want more than the next job. Then I saw you standing on that porch, rifle in hand, defending your home with nothing but grit and determination. And something in me recognized something in you." He squeezed her hand gently. "Maybe we are both people who have been alone too long. Maybe we both needed to find someone who understands what it means to fight for what matters. All I know is that when I am here, working this land with you, I feel like I am finally where I am supposed to be." Josephine's heart was pounding so hard she was certain Lucas must be able to hear it. "I feel that too," she confessed. "It terrifies me." "Why?" "Because everyone leaves eventually. Everyone I have ever cared about has left or died or disappeared. I do not think I could survive it again." Lucas stepped even closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I am not going anywhere, Josephine. I swear to you I am not leaving. You are stuck with me for as long as you will have me." "How can you promise that?" she whispered. "How can anyone promise that?" "I cannot control fate or death or acts of God," Lucas said, "but I can control my choices, and I choose to stay. I choose this ranch, this life." He lifted his free hand and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I choose you." The world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, standing in the tall grass under the endless Texas sky. Josephine felt as though she were standing on the edge of a cliff, terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. Then Lucas leaned in slowly, carefully, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Josephine did not pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. The kiss deepened, becoming more certain, and Josephine felt something long frozen inside her begin to thaw when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "Is this all right?" he asked. "Tell me if I have overstepped." "It is all right," Josephine said, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she smiled with genuine happiness. "It is more than all right." They rode back to the ranch hand in hand, the horses walking close together. That evening, instead of retreating to their separate rooms after dinner, they sat together on the porch, Josephine leaning against Lucas's shoulder as they watched the stars emerge. They talked about their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Lucas told her about growing up in Missouri, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 16, about the years spent wandering because he had no anchor to hold him anywhere. Josephine told him about her childhood on the ranch, about her father's dreams and her mother's gentleness, about the loneliness that had nearly consumed her. "We are quite a pair," Lucas said with a soft laugh. "Two broken people trying to build something whole." "Maybe that is exactly what we need," Josephine replied. "Someone who understands what it means to be broken." As summer progressed, the ranch began to truly thrive. With two people working together, projects that had seemed impossible became manageable. They expanded the garden, repaired the barn roof completely, and even managed to purchase 3 more cattle with the money saved from their careful management. More importantly, Josephine bloomed like a flower after rain. The hard, defensive shell she had worn for so long gradually fell away, revealing the warm, passionate woman beneath. She laughed more. She talked more. She let herself dream again. Lucas was endlessly patient with her, understanding that trust had to be rebuilt slowly after so much loss. He never pushed her faster than she was ready to go, but he also never let her retreat completely into her old isolation. They developed small rituals: coffee together each morning before work began, a walk around the property each evening to check on everything, quiet conversations on the porch before bed. These small, consistent acts of togetherness wove a bond between them stronger than any rope. One evening in late August, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Lucas said, "I have been thinking." "About what?" Josephine asked, comfortable in the circle of his arm. "About the future, about making this partnership official." He took a breath. "Josephine, I love you. I think I have loved you since that first day when you stood on the porch looking like you would fight the whole world if necessary. You are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever met. And I want to spend the rest of my life at your side if you will have me." Josephine sat up, her heart racing. "Lucas, I know I do not have much to offer," he continued quickly. "No property of my own, not much money, but I can give you my loyalty, my work, and every bit of love I have. I can promise to stand with you through whatever comes. I can promise to never leave, never give up, never stop fighting for us." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple ring, silver with a small blue stone. "This was my mother's. It is all I have left of her. I would be honored if you would wear it." Tears welled in Josephine's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "You really want to marry me, even knowing how difficult I can be, how stubborn and scared?" Lucas smiled. "Especially knowing all that. You would not be you without those things. And I love you exactly as you are." He held up the ring. "What do you say, Josephine Edwards? Will you marry me and make me the happiest man in Texas?" "Yes," Josephine said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." Lucas slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit as though it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with all the passion and tenderness he had been holding back. Josephine kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring all her love and hope and gratitude into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard and grinning like fools. "When?" Josephine asked. "When should we marry?" "As soon as possible," Lucas said. "I have waited long enough to call you my wife." They rode into Dallas 2 days later and made arrangements with Reverend Phillips, who seemed surprised but pleased to see Josephine looking so happy and healthy. They set the date for the following Saturday, giving them a week to prepare. Josephine bought fabric for a simple but pretty dress, her first new clothing in over a year. Lucas purchased a new shirt and had his one good suit cleaned. They invited the few neighbors who had remained friendly and the shopkeepers in town who had been kind during the difficult times. The wedding took place in the small church on a beautiful September morning. Josephine wore her new dress, pale blue with white lace, and had woven wildflowers into her hair. Lucas stood at the altar looking nervous and proud in equal measure. As Josephine walked down the aisle, she felt the weight of the past year, all the grief and struggle and loneliness begin to lift from her shoulders. She was not alone anymore. She would never be alone again. When Reverend Phillips asked if she took Lucas to be her husband, Josephine said, "I do, with absolute certainty." When Lucas promised to love and cherish her for all his days, his voice rang with conviction. They exchanged simple vows they had written themselves, promising partnership and honesty and unwavering support. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed Josephine with such joy that the small gathering broke into applause and laughter. The celebration afterward was modest but heartfelt. Their neighbors brought food and well wishes. The shopkeepers gave small gifts. Even some of Lucas's acquaintances from his cattle-driving days showed up, having heard the news. Josephine stood beside her new husband, accepting congratulations, and felt a happiness so profound it was almost painful. This was her new beginning. This was her reward for refusing to give up. They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, the wagon loaded with gifts and leftover food. Lucas lifted Josephine down from the wagon seat, but instead of setting her on her feet, he carried her up the porch steps and across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson," he said, his voice warm with affection. "I like the sound of that," Josephine replied, kissing him softly. "Mrs. Josephine Lawson. It has a good ring to it." That night, they came together as husband and wife with tenderness and passion. Lucas was gentle and patient, understanding that this was new and overwhelming for Josephine. She gave herself to him without reservation, trusting him completely. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed that had once seemed too large and empty, and Josephine felt a peace she had never known before. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Lucas asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "For seeing me, for staying. For loving me when I was not sure I deserved to be loved." Lucas pulled her closer. "You deserve everything good this world has to offer, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that." The months that followed were perhaps the happiest of Josephine's life. She and Lucas worked the ranch together, building it back up to what it had been in her father's best years and then beyond. They hired 2 ranch hands when the work became too much for 2 people alone, good men who respected Josephine's authority and worked well under Lucas's guidance. They purchased more cattle, expanded their pastures, and even began raising horses, which proved surprisingly profitable. But beyond the practical successes, what made those months so precious was the deepening of their relationship. Marriage revealed new facets of each other, small quirks and habits that became endearing with time. Josephine discovered that Lucas sang while he worked, old trail songs he had learned on cattle drives, and that he had an unexpected talent for woodworking. Lucas learned that Josephine talked to the animals as though they were people, and that she had a sharp, clever sense of humor that emerged when she felt safe. They had their arguments, of course. Josephine's stubbornness clashed with Lucas's occasional overprotectiveness. They disagreed about how to manage certain aspects of the ranch, about money, about 100 small things. But they learned to talk through their conflicts, to compromise, to remember that they were on the same side. Every argument resolved brought them closer together, building a foundation of trust and communication that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. In the spring of 1874, Josephine realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mix of joy and terror. She had lost so much in her life, and the thought of bringing a child into the world felt both wonderful and frightening. When she told Lucas, his face lit up with such pure happiness that her fears receded slightly. "A baby," he said, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Josephine, this is incredible. You are not worried?" she asked. "About all the things that could go wrong." "Of course I am worried," Lucas said honestly. "But I am more excited than worried. We are going to be parents. We are going to have a family." He kissed her forehead. "And we are going to get through it together, just like we get through everything else." The pregnancy was difficult at times. The summer heat was oppressive, and Josephine struggled with nausea and exhaustion. But Lucas was attentive and supportive, taking on extra work so she could rest, making sure she ate properly, rubbing her aching back in the evenings. The ranch hands stepped up as well, clearly fond of their employer and wanting to help. In November, as the weather was cooling, Josephine went into labor. Lucas rode frantically to Dallas to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Carson who had delivered half the babies in the county. The labor was long and painful, lasting through the night and into the next day. Lucas stayed by Josephine's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement. Finally, in the early afternoon, their son was born. He came into the world screaming lustily, red-faced and perfect. Mrs. Carson placed the baby on Josephine's chest, and both parents stared in wonder at the tiny life they had created. "He is beautiful," Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are amazing. Look what you did." Josephine was too overwhelmed to speak. She looked down at her son, at his tiny fingers and dark hair, and felt a love so fierce it was almost frightening. This was her child. This was their family. This was the future she had fought so hard to protect, now made real and tangible in her arms. They named him Thomas, after Josephine's father. Thomas Lawson would grow up on this ranch, just as she had. But unlike Josephine, he would grow up surrounded by love and security, with parents who were partners in every sense of the word. He would never know the loneliness that had nearly destroyed his mother. The first year of Thomas's life was exhausting but joyful. Josephine and Lucas took turns caring for him during the night, both walking the floors with a fussy baby while the other tried to sleep. They marveled at every milestone: his first smile, his first laugh, the day he rolled over on his own. The ranch continued to prosper, and they were able to hire additional help, which gave them more time to focus on their son. On Thomas's first birthday, they held a celebration at the ranch. The neighbors came, the ranch hands, people from town. It was a far cry from the isolation and desperation of just a few years earlier. As Josephine watched her son smash his hands into a small cake while Lucas laughed beside him, she felt an overwhelming gratitude for the path her life had taken. That evening, after everyone had left and Thomas was asleep, Josephine and Lucas sat on the porch in their usual spot. Biscuit, now quite old, lay at their feet. The stars were brilliant overhead and the air was cool and pleasant. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Josephine asked. "If you had not stopped here that day, if I had not gone looking for you in Dallas." "All the time," Lucas admitted. "I think about how close I came to just riding past, how I almost did not stop for water. Then I think about everything I would have missed." He took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her wedding ring. "You changed my life, Josephine. You gave me a home, a purpose, a family. Before you, I was just drifting. Now I have everything I ever wanted but never knew how to ask for." "I feel the same," Josephine said. "I thought I was strong because I could survive alone. But real strength is letting someone in, trusting them with your heart even when you are terrified. You taught me that. You saved me, Lucas." "We saved each other," Lucas corrected gently. "You were already surviving when I met you. You already had the strength. I just gave you a reason to stop fighting alone." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the night. Then Josephine said, "I think I want more children, not right away, but eventually. I want Thomas to have siblings, to never feel alone the way I did." Lucas smiled. "I would like that too. A house full of children, all of them learning to work this ranch and love this land. We will build something that lasts, Josephine, something our grandchildren will still be proud of." It was a beautiful vision, and one that would largely come to pass. Over the next several years, Josephine and Lucas had two more children, a daughter named Emily in 1876 and another son named James in 1878. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. They built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, though they kept the original structure as a guest house and reminder of where they had started. Thomas grew into a capable boy who loved the ranch as much as his parents did. Emily was spirited and clever, often helping her mother with the accounts and business side of the operation. James was gentle and thoughtful, with a special talent for working with horses. All three children grew up knowing they were loved, knowing they were valued, and knowing the story of how their parents had found each other in the midst of struggle and built a life together through determination and love. As the years passed, Josephine sometimes thought back to that desperate time when she had been alone, fighting to survive, convinced that she had to carry every burden herself. It felt like a different lifetime, like a story about someone else. The woman she had become, confident and surrounded by love, seemed almost unrecognizable compared to the desperate, lonely girl she had been. One evening in the summer of 1880, Josephine stood on the porch watching her children play in the yard while Lucas worked with a new horse in the corral. The sun was setting, painting everything in warm, golden light. Thomas was teaching Emily how to throw a rope while James played with a litter of puppies from Biscuit's final offspring before the old dog had passed peacefully 2 years earlier. The house behind her was full of life and laughter. The ranch was thriving. Her family was healthy and happy, Lucas finished with the horse and walked over to join her, slipping an arm around her waist and pulling her close. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Josephine said. "How far we have come. How different my life is now compared to what it was before you. How grateful I am." Lucas kissed her temple. "You know what I think about sometimes? That day I rode up to this ranch, I almost kept going. I was tired and the sun was brutal, and I thought about waiting until I got to Dallas to find water. But something made me stop. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was just luck. But whatever it was, I am grateful for it every single day." "You told me once that I did not have to be alone anymore," Josephine said. "Do you remember?" "Of course I remember. Those words changed my life. They gave me permission to stop being so hard, to let myself need someone, to let myself love and be loved." She turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Lucas Lawson, more than I have words to express. Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for staying. Thank you for building this life with me." Lucas smiled, the same warm smile that had first begun to crack through her defenses all those years ago. "I love you too, Josephine. And I will keep staying, keep loving you, keep building this life with you for as long as I draw breath. That is a promise." They kissed, a sweet, lingering kiss that spoke of years of partnership and love and shared struggle. When they broke apart, Thomas called out that he had finally gotten the rope right, and Emily was insisting she could do it better. Lucas laughed and called back encouragement, while Josephine just smiled, her heart full to bursting. This was her life now. Not perfect, because life was never perfect, but good, solid, full of love and purpose and hope. She had survived the loneliness, the loss, the desperate struggle to keep going when everything seemed impossible. She had survived, and more than that, she had found a way to thrive. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky and the children's laughter filled the air, Josephine sent up a silent prayer of thanks. For Lucas, who had stopped for water and stayed for love. For her children, who would never know the loneliness she had endured. For this ranch, which had been worth fighting for after all. For second chances and new beginnings and the resilience of the human heart. She had been alone, but she did not have to be anymore, and that made all the difference. The years continued to roll by with the steady rhythm of ranch life. The children grew taller and more capable, each finding their own place in the operation of the ranch, while maintaining the close bond that Josephine and Lucas had nurtured between them. Thomas, at age 8, could already ride as well as many adults and showed a natural instinct for understanding cattle. Emily, at 6, had her mother's head for numbers and often sat with Josephine as she managed the accounts, asking questions that showed remarkable insight for her age. James, at 4, followed his father everywhere, mimicking Lucas's gestures and speech patterns with adorable precision. In 1881, tragedy struck the neighboring ranch when a fire destroyed their barn and killed several animals. Josephine and Lucas immediately organized help, rallying other ranchers in the area to contribute materials, labor, and livestock to help the Mitchells rebuild. It was during this effort that Josephine fully realized how much had changed. Where once she had been isolated and alone, now she was part of a community. Where once she had been the one desperately needing help, now she was in a position to offer it. The transformation was profound and deeply satisfying. The Mitchells, a couple in their 50s whose own children had moved east, became close friends. Martha Mitchell particularly took to Josephine, impressed by her business acumen and no-nonsense approach to ranch management. The two women would often have tea together while their husbands discussed cattle prices and water rights, and Martha became something of a mother figure to Josephine, filling a void she had not fully acknowledged. One afternoon, As they sat on Martha's newly rebuilt porch watching the children play, Martha said, "You have done remarkably well for yourself, Josephine. I remember when you were all alone here, and we all thought the ranch would fail within months. Many people said you should sell and move to town, find a husband there, but you proved everyone wrong." Josephine smiled. "I was stubborn, maybe too stubborn. If Lucas had not come along when he did, I might have worked myself to death trying to prove something." "But he did come along," Martha said, "and you were wise enough to accept his help. That takes strength too, you know, knowing when you need someone." She paused, then added, "You two have something special. Anyone can see how much you love each other. It is rare to find that kind of partnership." "I know," Josephine said softly. "I try never to take it for granted. Every day I am grateful he chose to stay." "He is grateful too," Martha said. "Robert was talking to Lucas last week, and Lucas said he considers himself the luckiest man alive. Said he found his home when he found you." The words warmed Josephine's heart. Even after years of marriage, it still moved her to know how deeply Lucas loved her. Their relationship had only deepened with time, growing from that initial desperate need and attraction into something rich and multifaceted. They were lovers, certainly, but also best friends, business partners, and co-parents. They knew each other's moods and needs almost instinctively. They could communicate with a glance across a crowded room. They had built a life that was truly shared, neither one dominating or receding, but both contributing equally. That evening, after the children were in bed, Josephine told Lucas about her conversation with Martha. They were in their bedroom, the window open to let in the cool night breeze. Lucas was removing his boots while Josephine brushed out her hair at the vanity. "She is right, you know," Lucas said. "I am the luckiest man alive." Josephine met his eyes in the mirror and smiled. "I feel the same way. Lucky, I mean. Sometimes I think about that girl standing on the porch with a rifle, so scared and alone but trying to hide it. I wish I could tell her it was all going to work out, that she was going to find happiness beyond anything she could imagine." Lucas stood and came to stand behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "That girl was incredibly brave. She survived impossible circumstances through sheer will. You should be proud of her." "I am," Josephine said, "but I am also glad she does not exist anymore. I would not go back to being her for anything in the world." Lucas leaned down and kissed the top of her head. "You never have to be alone again. I promise you that." It was a promise he kept faithfully. Through the ordinary challenges of life and the occasional crisis, Lucas remained steadfast. When Josephine's brother Michael finally returned from California in 1882, broke and ashamed after his gold dreams failed to materialize, Lucas welcomed him without judgment and helped him get back on his feet. When a harsh winter in 1883 killed several cattle and put a strain on their finances, Lucas worked double hours and never complained. When Josephine fell seriously ill with pneumonia in 1884, Lucas sat by her bedside day and night, caring for her and the children until she recovered. But it was not just in crises that Lucas showed his love. It was in the small, daily acts of partnership. The way he always made sure there was hot coffee ready when Josephine came in from early morning chores. The way he consulted her on every major decision, valuing her opinion as equal to his own. The way he still kissed her goodbye every morning and hello every evening as though they were newlyweds. The way he listened when she needed to talk, offered advice when she asked for it, and stayed silent when she just needed someone to be present. Josephine reciprocated this love in her own ways. She mended his clothes with care, made his favorite meals when he had a particularly hard day, and always made time for intimate conversations even when both were exhausted. She supported his ideas for improving the ranch, stood by his side when he had to make difficult decisions, and made sure he knew every day how valued and appreciated he was. Their children grew up seeing this model of marriage and absorbed its lessons. Thomas began courting a neighbor's daughter when he was 18, and his respect and consideration for her clearly reflected what he had learned from watching his parents. Emily declared that she would only marry someone who treated her as an equal partner, the way her father treated her mother. James, still young, nevertheless understood that love meant support and partnership, not control or dominance. In 1886, when Thomas was 12, he asked his parents how they had met. They were sitting around the dinner table, a nightly ritual that Josephine and Lucas insisted on no matter how busy the day had been. The question caught Josephine slightly off guard, as she realized they had never told the children the full story. "Well," Lucas began, glancing at Josephine for permission to continue. She nodded. "I was traveling through Texas, looking for work. I had been on the trail for a long time and was running low on water. I saw this ranch and decided to stop and ask if I could refill my canteen." "And Mama let you?" Emily asked, already understanding that strangers could be dangerous. "Your mother met me on the porch with a rifle," Lucas said with a smile. "She was not taking any chances, but she let me water my horse and myself, even though she did not trust me yet. I offered him work," Josephine continued. "I needed help desperately, but I was too proud to admit it. When your father said he was looking for ranch work, I sent him away. Then, a few days later, I realized I really did need help, so I rode into Dallas to find him." "And you fell in love?" James asked, his eyes wide. "Not right away," Lucas said. "Your mother did not trust easily and I did not want to push, but we worked together and slowly we became friends. And then one day I realized I did not want to be anywhere else but right here with her." "I was so scared," Josephine admitted. "I had been alone for so long, and I had convinced myself I was better off that way. Your father had to teach me that letting someone in did not make me weak. It made me stronger." "Everyone left and she survived on her own," Lucas said, his voice growing more serious. "Your mother's family was gone, the ranch hands had left, and she was managing this entire place by herself. It was extraordinary and heartbreaking at the same time. When I arrived, I told her she did not have to be alone anymore, that we could do it together." Thomas was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then he said, "Is that why you always say we are stronger together? Because Mama learned that from you." "We learned it from each other," Josephine corrected. "Your father needed a home and a purpose as much as I needed help and companionship. We saved each other." Emily reached across the table and took her mother's hand. "I am glad you found each other. Otherwise, we would not be here." Josephine squeezed her daughter's hand, emotion swelling in her chest. "I am glad too, sweetheart, more than you can possibly know." The conversation drifted to other topics, but later that night, after the children were asleep, Josephine found herself reflecting on how far they had all come. The ranch that had nearly died was now thriving. The woman who had been alone and desperate was now surrounded by love and family. The future that had once seemed so bleak was now bright with possibility. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, already knowing she was awake despite the darkness. "How good our life is," Josephine said. "How lucky we are." Lucas pulled her closer, her back to his chest, his arm wrapped around her waist. "We are lucky. But we also worked hard for this. You especially. You fought to keep this place alive, and now look at what it has become." "You should be proud." "We should be proud," Josephine corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you." "Maybe," Lucas conceded, "but I think you would have found a way. You are the most determined person I have ever met. If you had not hired me, you would have found someone else or figured it out on your own." But I did not want to do it without you, Josephine said, turning in his arms to face him. I did not want to survive. I wanted to live, and that is what you gave me. A life worth living, full of love and purpose and joy. Lucas kissed her, a deep, lingering kiss that still had the power to make her heart race even after so many years. You gave me the same thing, he murmured against her lips. A home, a family, a reason to stop wandering. You are my everything, Josephine. They made love that night with the quiet intensity of long married couples who still desired each other deeply. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Josephine felt a profound contentment. This was everything she had never dared to hope for during those dark, lonely days. This was the reward for refusing to give up, for being brave enough to accept help, for opening her heart to love. The years continued their steady march forward. Thomas grew into a strong young man who took on more and more responsibility at the ranch. He married his sweetheart, Sarah, in 1889, and they built a small house on the edge of the property. Emily, always independent and fierce, declared her intention to become a teacher and began studying with the schoolteacher in Dallas. James showed an aptitude for horse training that surprised and delighted everyone. In 1890, Josephine became a grandmother when Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl they named Ruth. Holding her grandchild for the first time, Josephine was overwhelmed with emotion. This little girl represented the continuation of everything Josephine and Lucas had built. She would grow up on this ranch, surrounded by family who loved her, never knowing the loneliness and desperation that had once threatened to destroy everything. Your grandmother was a very brave woman, Josephine whispered to the sleeping baby. She almost lost everything, but she refused to give up. Because of her, you have this life, this family, this home. Always remember that. Lucas stood beside her, looking down at his granddaughter with wonder. Our legacy, he said softly. This is what we built together. This is what love built, Josephine corrected. Love and partnership and refusing to give up on each other. As the 1890s progressed, the ranch continued to prosper. Thomas and Sarah had 2 more children, expanding the family further. Emily did indeed become a teacher, opening a small school on the ranch property that served the children of surrounding families. James married a young woman named Grace in 1895, and they began raising horses that became known throughout the region for their quality and temperament. Josephine and Lucas, now in their 40s, gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, though they remained involved in major decisions. They had built something that would outlast them, a legacy that would continue for generations. But more importantly, they had built a life together that was rich in love, partnership, and shared purpose. One evening in the summer of 1898, they sat on the porch in the exact spot where they had sat so many times before. The house was full of grandchildren visiting, their laughter and noise a constant background hum. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and well-maintained. The sun was setting in a spectacular display of orange and purple and gold. You remember when you first came here? Josephine asked, her hand in Lucas's. When I was alone and desperate and trying so hard to pretend I had everything under control. I remember, Lucas said. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen, and the most stubborn. Josephine laughed. I was terrified. Of you, of needing help, of what it would mean if I admitted I could not do it all alone. But you did admit it, Lucas said. You came to Dallas and asked me to come back. That took more courage than anything else. You said I did not have to be alone anymore, Josephine said, the words still as powerful as they had been all those years ago. Those words changed everything for me. They gave me permission to stop carrying everything by myself. Lucas lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. And you gave me a home, a purpose, a family, everything I had been searching for without knowing what I was looking for. We found each other at exactly the right time. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun disappear below the horizon. Inside the house, one of the grandchildren started crying, and they could hear their daughter-in-law soothing her. A horse whinnied in the corral. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "I love you," Josephine said, the simple words carrying the weight of more than 2 decades of shared life. "I love you too," Lucas replied, "always and forever." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had survived the impossible, built a life from ruins, and found a love that had transformed her from a desperate, lonely woman into someone surrounded by family and security. She had learned that true strength was not in doing everything alone, but in knowing when to accept help and let others in. The ranch that had almost died was now thriving, home to 3 generations of family. The woman who had been alone was now the matriarch of a large and loving family. The future that had once seemed so bleak was now bright with possibility and promise. Josephine looked at Lucas, at the man who had stopped for water and stayed for love, and smiled. He had given her everything: partnership, love, family, and a life beyond anything she could have imagined during those dark, lonely days. And she had given him the same in return. They had saved each other. They had built a life together. And that life would continue long after they were gone, a testament to the power of love, partnership, and refusing to give up. Everyone had left, and she had survived on her own. Then the cowboy had said she did not have to anymore. And in accepting his help, in opening her heart to love, Josephine had found not just survival, but a life rich with meaning, purpose, and joy. As they sat together under the emerging stars, hands intertwined, hearts full, they both knew with absolute certainty that they had found exactly what they were meant to find: each other. And in each other, they had found home. The story of their love would be told and retold through generations. Their grandchildren would tell their own children about the brave woman who survived alone and the kind cowboy who taught her she did not have to. It would become family legend, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope and love could emerge if you were brave enough to reach for it. But for Josephine and Lucas, sitting on that porch in the fading light, it was not a legend. It was simply their life. Their beautiful, hard-won, precious life. And they would continue to live it together, side by side, partners in all things until their final days. The ranch house glowed with lamplight as the evening deepened. Inside, their children and grandchildren gathered, the family they had created together. Outside, the land they had fought to keep stretched into the darkness, a testament to perseverance and love. Josephine leaned her head on Lucas's shoulder, feeling his steady breathing, his solid presence. This was home. This was love. This was everything she had fought for and everything he had given her. Together, they had turned desperation into hope, loneliness into family, and struggle into triumph. The story that had begun with gunfire and grief had become a story of love and redemption. And as the stars wheeled overhead, unchanging and eternal, Josephine and Lucas sat together in perfect peace, knowing that their love would endure as long as the land itself, a legacy for all who came after.